pretty straightforward, and it isn't straightforward anymore. The new world of your more modern open enterprise is really a variety of windows that can be opened and closed. And so you've got a lot of holes in the firewall now where we're integrating with applications and services and products and partners and teams that are outside of the core organization. And so access control is much more difficult. And so we have to think about how do we regain some of that control and understand how to implement proper API security, or security in general, in a way that makes sense and still enables a sort of innovative, open experience that people want from the typical enterprise organization today. And so APIs are really the very foundation of how those sorts of interactions happen, right? Every one of those windows is typically represented by an API. And so we are using those APIs as a way to pass data back and forth, integrate SaaS-based services that are way more efficient than the sort of typical on-premise stuff that we've had for years and years. And so we have to think about how do I continue to allow those APIs to propagate and be useful and again, driving innovation within the organization, but also get back to a more centralized governance model, or at least understanding the flow of data between people that are inside the organization and services that sit outside. And I think really the key point to what I'm trying to say here is that we need to understand the who and the what and the why of this data flow. And identity really becomes a very important factor. It's key, in fact, to understanding what sort of interactions, what sort of data flows are going on. And so we're really trying to then extend perhaps the traditional identity and access management technologies that have been around forever, and sort of extend their utility into this new world. And I think if I look at how API gateways are involved there, we're starting to talk about how do I bridge this, and we'll look at some specific examples, how do I bridge very legacy infrastructure into applications such as Salesforce.com? How do I perhaps provide access for my mobile applications or field employees to get authenticated and authorized to use back-end systems? And so we'd have to keep, not reinventing the wheel, but reimagining how identity is going to be used, but still leverage the sort of investments that we've had in this infrastructure for a long time. So identity is really quite key, but in actual fact, it's probably not identity as such, because not all identity solutions are created equal, I would say. There are some useful identity solutions out there right now, and some that really aren't so useful. So in fact, whilst the identity component is what we're after, we're trying to offer you a useful user experience that sort of brings identity into the palm of your hand, makes it powerful for the end user, but also secure at the same time. And that's actually, again, where we can start to look at API gateway use cases to bridge this world, enforcing security where we need it, and empowering a useful experience. And we'll look at some specific technologies around that, things like OAuth, things like OpenID Connect, and how those sorts of things are actually helping organizations to do some, to leverage identity in a more useful way for their employees, for their customers and partners. Security, though, is, I guess, a variety of different things. So to get to this ultimate user experience, we're really looking at a variety of levels. I take mobile as kind of an example here because I think it's a good one. It's one of the areas where most organizations are focusing a lot of their time. Almost every company has some kind of mobile project ongoing right now. So you kind of start at the very the physical device. How do I control that? How do I make the actual application and user experience as easy as possible? So I can provision devices, I can provision services directly so that employees don't have to do much work. So that's sort of the MDM space. I can then look at application management. So that's sort of a step above the device, but saying, here are a bunch of apps that I want you to use as part of our, corporate IT infrastructure. We can make it easy again to provision those things. We can perhaps offer single sign-on across applications. Then we sort of look at more of the infrastructure side, so basic firewalling. Then we can think about our traditional identity infrastructure and how that's being exposed and managed for these same mobile applications. And then we get to API security, and I think this is what I want to focus on today, but in actual fact, it's almost an all-encompassing solution. API security can span all of these different levels in some way, and we're going to think about some specific examples now where you'll see that even basic API management functionality can go a long way to give you a holistic security approach for mobile and for cloud. So what is the role of the API gateway? I think it can be seen as doing a whole lot of different things. And again, we're talking specifically about security and access control here rather than integration and optimization and that sort of stuff, because obviously that's very much the role of the API gateway too. So basic stuff like threat protection, being able to prevent simple attack vectors across your APIs, so such as SQL injections or other types of threats. We can also provide encryption end-to-end. So if you're transporting data from a back-end service into the cloud, for example, or from to a mobile device, we can encrypt that data as it flows over the wire. Obviously, authentication, authorization, and then kind of wrapping all of that up, you can tie policy enforcement rules into a bunch of these other features. So, for example, something really simple, understanding who you are and what you're trying to do, I can then apply a basic policy around routing your traffic one way or another, or allowing you to have this number of transactions per day versus somebody else that gets a higher amount of capacity on the gateway. So these are like very basic groups of functionality, but they actually together can become very powerful tools when we think about API security as a whole. Not a recent example, but I think one that's still pretty fresh in our minds. Snapchat. Probably everybody remembers the Snapchat disaster that they had around data breaching. They really could have avoided a large part of the trouble that they had by implementing very, very basic features. So if I was to look at their Find Friends API, basically allowed an unlimited number of API calls into their backend where I could just keep passing random strings of numbers to figure out which users existed. So effectively, I could try every single mobile number in existence to figure out the users attached to that device, or to that identity, that number. Really basic rate limiting could have helped us prevent that from happening, right? If I could have said, I've issued you an API key, but you can only call this API 10 times a day or 10 times an hour. That would have been a really good first step to prevent the sort of massive data breach that they had. So they didn't need to have really fancy authentication. They didn't need to change a whole lot in the back end. They just needed to say, just have a sensible limit as to how this API is actually going to be used. And again, this is really one of the key roles of the API gateway. We're simply trying to implement best practices around how APIs are going to be accessed and understanding that I have your identity or the token associated with your API access, so I can apply a sensible rule to you. And so that's something that should have been in place. Taking a completely different example, but again, a really important one for the types of things we're trying to do today, basic federation. I think I would say almost every single customer that Axway has is doing some kind of identity federation where we're integrating on-premise data with some cloud service. Salesforce.com just seemed like an easy example to highlight. The most obvious challenge here is that we're trying to mediate between different types of identity, right? So I have my on-premise Active Directory or whatever it might be that's managing internal SSO around my organization and just general access control, access management, and how do I bridge that into a world where Salesforce.com is involved? Again, we put the API gateway in the middle to help with this. So the first step is perhaps mediating between different types of tokens, right? We've overlaid a full STS on top of your existing identity infrastructure so that I can actually talk to Salesforce in the way that they want to be talked to and integrate with the back-end infrastructure the way it always has worked. So we don't have to make changes anywhere. The gateway is providing that bridge, that mediation between these two platforms. And of course, it also gives us a way to track and audit usage. We're going to keep coming back to that. One of the things that we've lost, as we said at the beginning, is that this world of having multiple open windows has limited our ability to track and audit usage and manage the flow of data inside and outside the organization. So I think that's another, like I said, one of the key use cases that we see most of our customers working on today. But it's definitely not the it's not the most advanced use case. One thing that I thought was appropriate to bring up, because it still continues to drive me nuts, is this concept of the password anti-pattern. Do people know what I'm talking about when we say that? Anybody? Yes, some nods. So good example that maybe most people or some people for sure will have used is Mint. Does anybody use Mint to track their finances, their accounts across banks and credit cards and that sort of thing? So they ask you to provide your username and password to log into Bank of America or Chase or American Express. And they're storing your username and your password, and they say that's a secure way of doing things. To be fair, they don't have much choice because the financial institutions that are providing the data aren't offering a better way for you to delegate access. So this is called the password anti-pattern. We're effectively saying, here, you third-party application, take my credentials and do whatever you want with them. And I can't track that. I can't turn it off. I don't know where those passwords go. And that's bad. That's really bad. And in this day and age, it's really quite shocking that it still exists, but it does. And so if anybody here is working in an organization where that's the only mechanism to let a third-party app in, I think we want to really seriously think about changing that as quickly as possible. It just doesn't make sense when we have got so many good options to solve it. And OAuth is actually the most obvious example of changing this story. So in this case, what we're saying is we're going to authorize access to a specific client application and issue them a token which they then use to access your data. So the client never gets your password. All you're doing is saying specifically, here are the things that you're allowed to do, and we can centrally manage the access that they've got and manage the token that they've been issued back on the central authorization server. And again, we're just using Salesforce sort of workflow example here for simplicity, but this can apply to any type of third-party app integration or client app integration. And it's a very standardized process that everybody should be using. Again, where does the API gateway fit into this sort of model? Well, we're providing perhaps an OAuth facade on top of existing identity infrastructure. So if you've got a system that currently issues SAML tokens, for example, we can mediate between those. We can go from SAML to OAuth. And we've already said that client apps should never be allowed to store passwords. This even goes back to some of the stuff that Snapchat were doing wrong. They were storing the shared secret for their encryption in the app as a string. Oops. So simple stuff. Let's not put the onus on managing passwords on the client at all. The identity service provider should be doing that on your behalf. And then, like I said, we can provide a way to centrally deauthorize clients. So we can make a decision around when and why I would actually want to allow access and then take it away again. So some features that the gateway might have is a low latency token store to help us manage that sort of high capacity traffic that's going to be going back and forth. Then we can kind of extend this concept into social login. Well, yes. I think the NASCAR analogy here is still quite relevant because sometimes we do think there are so many buttons to press on when you see this social login option, and consumers can be a little bit confused about it. But it's really a very valuable tool. Number one, it's taking the onus of password management away from the user. And it's again, providing a way to sort of bring together the concept of access control and single sign-on as well. So really common scenario that I think is something that the gateway can help with. Again, what we said was we're bringing API access and SSO together, so we're putting the social login aspects of this identity management on the gateway at an infrastructure level. Again, we've got our auditing and reporting on traffic, so we can see who's doing what. We can actually analyze trends over time as well. And we can also map this back onto existing web access management tools that might exist. I think I'm coming up on my time a little bit now, but I did want to look at really quickly just 3 real-world examples where Axway customers are using the gateway in an identity context to help mediate between what they've got currently inside their organization and some of the challenges they have to integrate external apps. So this is one of the leading pharmaceutical companies in the world, actually. And so they quite simply wanted to be able to manage how their employees access different products or services inside the organization. And so in this case, they're using the gateway to actually issue tokens and provide the SSO capabilities between their intranet capabilities served by Oracle and SharePoint assets from Microsoft and the Active Directory product. Another example is similar, but this is specifically for mobile access. And so we kind of talked about this idea that the back-end infrastructure needs to be extended into mobile. So what we're doing here is saying we can have the existing Oracle and IBM IAM tools issue SAML tokens, and we will translate that into an OAuth token that's more appropriate for mobile access. So they're exposing RESTful web APIs out to the mobile application and issuing an OAuth token to authenticate and authorize access to those APIs, which is obviously much more appropriate than trying to do SOAP and SAML in a mobile context. And this, a leading mutual fund provider, again, here in the US, sort of spanning both this concept of mobile access and bringing in the idea of cloud access. So how can I send data back and forth between my on-premise data systems and Salesforce.com and being able to encrypt that on the fly. So again, what we're doing here is managing identity access via these mobile devices and also passing that identity through to Salesforce.com to authenticate and authorize people accessing stuff that's being stored in the cloud as well. we can probably talk about some of these examples offline, and I think we've got enough time for a couple of questions that people would like to ask now, or you can find me on Twitter. Questions? Yeah?
You mentioned about low latency token storage as one of the techniques that you provide. Can you give us some insight into like what is built on, what kind of
It's a very good question. I would probably need to ask the product manager for some of that specific detail. Yeah, let me follow up with you after, and we can definitely get some of the specific details on that. So we're asking, if you didn't hear the question, how the low latency token storage actually works and what sort of architecture that would be built on. I don't have that detail. Yep.
One of your case studies, you showed like a token exchange between your SharePoint and OEM.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about, are they just home growing their own hash table inside of Axway to track the mapping?
Yeah, I guess in that case, we're going to create a cookie effectively so yes, we'll have like the user will log in via the Axway gateway, and we will then, because they've been issued a cookie to SSO into the other platform. Yeah. Is that it? Well, like I said, please reach out to me via email or Twitter if you'd like to follow up on anything. I'll be around the rest of the day and tomorrow, so feel free to come find me. Thank you.